Good evening. Tonight is Thursday, August 20th, and we do have a quorum, so I will call this meeting to order. Due to the current federal and state emergency declarations, the Minnesota directive to residents to stay at home, and guidance about limiting person-to-person contact due to the COVID pandemic, the work session of the Edina Public School District School Board is being conducted online in accordance with Minnesota Statutes 13D-021. Persons may monitor this meeting from a remote location by the district's YouTube channel. School board members are reminded to mute their microphone or phone when they are not speaking. School board members wishing to speak should unmute their microphone so I can see who is waiting to speak and then wait to be recognized by the chair. I will determine the order in which board members wishing to speak will be recognized. Before I have John review the agenda, I wanted to address a few things going on in the community. We have received some feedback about the fact that we are doing virtual meetings and not meeting in person while asking our teachers and staff to come in. I want to let the community know that our boardroom is under construction right now, and we're actively trying to find a place where we can have our board meetings in person, allow the public to gather, and also send it to households virtually. Sentiment that we cannot ask our teachers and staff to do something different than we're willing to do as leaders. Second, as many have already seen, a letter from the board was distributed to our school district community and appeared in the Sun Current today. I just want to take a quick moment to clarify why we sent this letter, because we learned that unintentionally the message of this letter has caused some concern and confusion. The letter was written simply to acknowledge and support the notion that we, your board, your staff,
Erica and John, you've been muted.
Try it again.
Can you hear now? I will start again. Good evening. Tonight is Thursday, August 20th, and we do have a quorum, so I will call this meeting to order. Due to current federal and state...
We heard all that.
Yeah, I think it's...
Skip to the part about meeting and...
Sorry, Erica.
Okay. We wanted to take a quick moment to clarify why we sent this letter, because we have learned that unintentionally the message of this letter has caused some concern and confusion for some. The letter was written simply to acknowledge and support the notion that we, your board, our staff, teachers, students, and families are all in this together. We know this pandemic has brought to not just our school community, but to our jobs, our home, our livelihood. The letter was intended to encourage all of us that we will get through this together. And finally, I wanted to explain quickly to the community how our meetings work and how we operate as a board. We do have multiple board committees that meet quite often to move the work of the district forward. However, these committees have no decision-making authority, nor do they represent the entire board. The only time the board can meet in full is if the meeting has been posted to the public and the public has the opportunity to attend either in person or virtually. It is against the law for us to meet without doing it publicly. We'll now move to approving the agenda. I would like to make a motion, or I would like to let you know before we approve the agenda that I would like to move our Legislative Action Committee portion and board meeting agenda review to the end of the meeting. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda with the changes as mentioned?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
So the agenda is approved with moving LAC and the board meeting review to the end of the agenda. So John, will you please review the agenda with us tonight?
Yes, we will spend time reading some feedback from stakeholders about the 2020-2021. We will then talk about the 2021 school year in discussion. Under action, we need to approve the change in calendar for early release days. And then if the board sees fit, we will do approval of the school year planning. And then at the end of that, we will go into discussion around Legislative Action Committee and board meeting agenda review.
Great. Thank you, John. First on our agenda is stakeholder feedback, and we do have a representative sample of emails that we were given permission to read. And they were chosen to reflect the different perspectives that have been emailed to us. And so I will turn over to John to actually read the letters.
Thank you. I have been a special education teacher in the district for over 15 years, and I'm also a parent in the community. I'm emailing you in regards to the email that our union president, Tom Connell, sent to the district school board. His email was not representative of the entire union that he is supposed to support. He based it on a survey that he sent out in which only a small percent of staff actually filled out. I myself didn't even see the survey. Also, I think it's very inappropriate for him to be inserting and sharing opinions when he is supposed to be representing everyone in the union. It's frustrating that it seems as if only one point of view is being represented. I work with some of the most vulnerable students in distance learning for many of my students and their families. I feel strongly that students need to be provided with face-to-face instruction the safest way possible this fall, and I know that we can accomplish that. It is my hope that our hybrid model for instruction continues for this fall, and that we continue to make strides towards a full-time in-person model sooner rather than later. Dear Edina Public School Board members, we are ready today to express our concern for our own health and well-being, as well as the health and well-being and equitable education of many of our multilingual students and families. The district operates under a hybrid model of learning. We have strong concerns this will put our ML students and families at a distinct advantage. Concern one, multilingual families did not have equitable and timely access to critical district information regarding their choice of hybrid or EVA. While there are over 60 languages represented in Edina Public Schools, translated Google Forms and voicemails went out in Somali and Spanish only. A language tab was not adequate to serve families, many of whom are not comfortable with technology use or do not have ready access to technology. Families who speak languages other than English, Spanish, and Somali did not receive critical communication in a timely manner. We believe that it is possible that many families still need to be contacted via the language line and have simply been marked as hybrid if they did not respond on time. Preferred methods of communication by our multilingual not used. The Somali language is spoken by many people, written and read by few. Yet the communication sent out in Somali was a written email. Concern two, communities of color are disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The majority of our Edina multilingual students are students of color. In Minnesota, people of color are dying of COVID-19 at a disproportionately higher rate than their white counterparts. In Minnesota, children of color have higher rates of contracting COVID-19. In light of this information, we need to be absolutely certain that our Edina ML students of color have accurate information in their primary language to make an informed decision about whether or not to attend school during the pandemic. Concern three, lower level 1, 2, and 3, English learners will not receive an equitable education without dedicated content and multilingual EVA teachers assigned to teach them. EVA students will simply be added to hybrid sections at the secondary level, requiring the students to dial into the classes or otherwise engage in asynchronous activities. EVA ML students will not have the opportunity to work one-on-one with teachers without their own EVA sections. Individualized Google Meets were the norm this past spring during distance learning. Socioeconomic barriers made it such that wealthy and privileged students who select EVA have reliable internet and opportunities to hire tutors. While working with in-person classes, the other half of ML students who are learning online will not be able to adequately access help or one-on-one Google Meets to address their needs. Please consider the needs of some of our most vulnerable students in your decision-making process. Thank you. Sincerely, members of the EPS Multilingual Learners Team. I'm a teacher at the high school. I'm writing over my concern of students and staff returning to school in 2 weeks. I was lucky enough to receive an accommodation for this fall due to health reasons. However, the majority of my coworkers who asked for accommodations were not granted them. Many of these people have serious health conditions and are left with the choice of either losing their income or potentially losing their life. This is an impossible choice. In a meeting the other day, someone said, we are no longer looking at prevention, we are looking at mitigation. We know people will get sick. This is unacceptable to me. The safety measure that our district is putting in place is not sufficient, and as amazing as our kids are, they struggle with complying with safety requests such as proper mask wearing and social distancing. I hosted an Edina volleyball camp in person in July, and we repeatedly had to tell players to distance and even had to remind them to not share water bottles. They were trying and were always respectful when we asked, but they just kept forgetting and naturally congregated right next to each other, gave high fives, etc. I imagine the classrooms would be the same. Believe me, I would love to be back in work in person like a normal year, but these are not normal times. I really think as a district we can provide a quality online education until the time that students and staff can be guaranteed safety. We learned a lot from the spring, and we have a lot of ways now for students to collaborate together, socialize, and be successful online. If kids can't safely be next to each other, share materials, etc., what will in-person school be like they couldn't do online? I know that science would love to conduct labs on in-person days, but there won't be time to clean all the materials in between classes. So this means you either can't do the lab or multiple kids are touching the same surfaces. Please consider what other districts are doing, starting the year in distance learning, and then have phases of going back to in-person as cases and numbers decrease. Too many questions have not been answered, and there are too many unknowns to have an effective in-person class experience. I love teaching in Edina, but I'm so worried for my students and colleagues. Please don't put them at risk. Thank you for your consideration. Feel free to contact me with any questions or follow-up. Next one. Dear school board members, we know you have been working very hard to design options for 2021 school year in an unprecedented time. However, I have concerns about this email and what the intended message this email is trying to convey. I know we are asking for teachers and staff to teach in person, that as you put in, ask. There are many workers around the world, even in Edina, who don't have the option to work virtually. Doctors, nurses, retail, grocery, warehouse workers, postal service, etc. Not all workers have the option to work remotely. So while this is framed as a big ask, this is also a big ask of many people around the world to show up to their job. The burden on parents to work and manage kids with their virtual schedule and mental health issues is a lot asked. Even though you will apply lessons learned from the spring, virtual learning for us and our child is zero learning. Since I don't understand what the meaning behind this email message was trying to convey, it comes across as a setup that EPS will reverse course even before school starts to go all virtual, just as Bloomington and Roseville Public Schools announced. However, there is a reason why we chose Edina and paid an exorbitant amount in property taxes to have a world-class education, which cannot be accomplished virtually for our child for an extended amount of time. Unfortunately, COVID is not going away until likely a vaccine is created. If we move to 100% virtual, it could likely be for the rest of the school year. Our child has severely regressed since March. There was no in-person from mid-March to May, no in-person for ESY, and this year is TBD. Our child does not learn virtually at all. Her teachers and staff are wonderful, but she cannot learn virtually. If the school decides to go virtually, this will set our child back again. We have seen severe regression in her learning and mental health since March. We have a mental health crisis and an education crisis. If EPS decides to go 100% virtual, will you offer an extra year of eligibility? Every month and milestone is critical to us, and she will age out of the 18 to 20-year-old program. My child will age out of her programs and will be shortchanged by perhaps a year on all that she can learn. Every day, month, year, not being in an in-person learning environment lessens her chance to have an independent life. 100% distance learning is starting to impact women. We do not have enough women in leadership and top dollar earning roles. We are already seeing women taking a step back from their jobs and careers to manage distance learning. While I'm fortunate in that my spouse is 50-50 on everything, that is not the case for many. New York Times article just reported that still in this age, it's up to the moms to handle distance learning, and companies are seeing an exodus of women having to take lead to manage distance learning. This will have severe consequences for years to come, with women having equal pay and equal opportunity for top money-making positions. I feel that the unions are pressuring schools into making decisions that are in their best interest only, as I stated in point number 1. There are many frontline workers that have to show up and work. Special accommodations should be made for students who don't, just as in companies. If social distancing is followed, there's no reason why parents choose that a certain population can't receive in-person instruction. I am dismayed at the double standard. I see groups of kids all the time and about across Edina, 20 members of the high school dance team, and car wash, mountain biking, lacrosse team practicing in the field across our street, kids playing a baseball game, kids swimming in Minnehaha Creek, in just as close proximity as a classroom. How is that my child may not receive the education she deserves, but groups of kids can still be in organized sports? Also, all of her adaptive sports and rec opportunities have been canceled. How is it that fair? It's not. The most at-risk children who need to be in school the most are being impacted the greatest. Basically, the state is letting 20 to 30-year-olds dictate the education of our children. The state has done nothing but sit by. Why are we being punished by having bars open and college kids not following the rules? Again, the email message you sent was very unclear as the bottom line message you were trying to get across. In this already stressful time, it's created another layer of uncertainty. Hello, my daughter is going into second grade at Highlands. I wanted to reach out and give you my input for the upcoming school year. We understand the health and safety to staff and teachers is paramount. We want students to be in person as much as possible. This is imperative to their academic and social well-being. I believe there are ways to be creative and innovative to help this occur. I hope that the school is taking into consideration all student needs. Our students need to have in-person learning. Edina Public Schools community and school board have stated that their commitment is our unwavering commitment to educational excellence and our district's vision for each and every student to discover their possibilities and thrive. All distance learning will not be a thriving environment for my children or most children. I urge you to please listen to your community and continue with your hybrid option. As I contemplate teaching in the hybrid model, I'm daunted. Teaching in person is a full-time job. Teaching in an online setting proved to be more than a full-time job last spring. I'm honestly not sure how I'll be able to do both at the same time. Stressful though this is, however, it's not what keeps me up at night. I'm confident that I'll be able to figure it out and find a solution, however imperfect. But here's what I can't figure out. I can't figure out how to protect myself from catching a virus. Based on the current hybrid model at the high school, I estimate that in my classroom alone, I'll be in an indoor setting with somewhere between 50 to 70 students every day. Each of the students will be in 5 or 6 additional classrooms where they'll be in contact with 50 to 70 different people every day. This puts me in a circle of contact with hundreds, maybe even thousands of others. The school board recently sent out a statement saying that the ED cares deeply about our students, teachers, and staff. Many teachers that I have spoken with are not feeling cared for right now. As I talk to my colleague about the situation, I hear overwhelming anxiety. Colleagues I've spoken with say they feel like sacrificial lambs and pawns. We've heard precious little information about how our safety is being ensured other than that we are following Minnesota Department of Health guidelines. But nowhere on the Minnesota Department of Health website do I see that being in contact with so many people in an indoor setting is a good idea. Edina Public Schools is blessed with an extraordinary staff who consistently goes above and beyond to deliver exceptional instruction to our students. The fact that so many of us are feeling undervalued, underappreciated, and like we're being thrust into an unsafe situation should give you pause. We know our students, we know our classrooms, and we're not feeling safe. Please, let's figure out a better solution to this. Doesn't put so many staff and students at risk. Thank you. This year is my 19th year working for Edina Public Schools as a teacher. As a specialist, I teach multilingual learners. We met some of my students last winter when we attended the board meeting. I have worked in most buildings across the district. I love my students and my job. I would do anything to help my students achieve success in life. Believe me, I'm speaking from my heart. I'm also, and my daughter attended EPS. We are a family of immigrants. After graduating from Edina in 2014, my daughter attended an Ivy League university. This year, she was forwarded a Fulbright to teach English in Austria. She also works for a government nonprofit exposing corruption in tech world. All of these successes would not have been possible without her amazing EPS teachers, starting with kindergarten and ending with every single one teacher at EHS. Personally, I come from Russia. I grew up in the Soviet Union. To understand the mentality of the Soviet Union, all you need to know is that during World War II, known in Russia as the Great Patriotic War, the country used human lives as a shield. This is how the war was won. The Soviet Union continued to use this strategy in every area of human life. Life is worth nothing in Russia, not then and not now. A few years ago, in 2010, my mother walked out of our house. She was not seen since. Police never looked for her. A hiker found her in the woods 4 months later. I do not need to tell you what this event did to my family, my father, my sister, myself. I do not wish anyone to go through this type of anguish. My father had a heart condition, hereditary in our family. He was taken to a hospital in Russia. He was hospitalized there for 2 weeks and then released. He needed an aortic valve replaced, but this hospital is not a cardiac hospital, so they did nothing for him. They did not even tell the family what the condition was. We found a private doctor, but it was too late. 2014. The same month, my daughter graduated from high school. Why am I sharing these personal details with you? I moved to this country, and what impressed me here was that the government or people in power cared for human life. That was the defining moment of my life. Of course, I'm older now and not as naive. What is happening in this country now, I do not understand. I have a variety of medical conditions that put me at a higher risk of death or complications from COVID-19. So does my husband. Yet my accommodations request was not approved. As an immigrant family, we have no other relatives or support system in this country. My daughter will be alone should anything happen to us. I'm asking you to protect Edina public school students, teachers, and staff and start the school year online. Do not treat us like disposable items for a science experiment. People are your most valuable asset. We cannot teach from the grave. To whom it may concern, I've heard from other parents at the school board's meeting tonight discuss the potential of a full distance learning model. I'm extremely concerned by this and would like to submit this letter for the school board's consideration. I fully appreciated the district's prior approach of giving parents the choice between a hybrid model and 100% distance. I was honored to live in such a progressive district and felt my hard-earned tax dollars were put. And frankly, as I run a children's products company that is dedicated to safety and is participating in lobbying and influencing regulation on state and federal levels, so the decision inspired me personally and professionally. That said, I'm really disturbed by the possibility of 100% distance learning and can't tell you that my daughter would be extremely unhappy with that outcome. That would not be in her best interest, nor ours as a family. At the end of the last school year, she stated that she had trouble learning, and we saw the impacts directly as she completed tasks that were not highly engaging and spent the rest of the time bored and sleeping. Although with planning, I expect that would be better this year, I don't see the outcome changing much. Learning and working at home 100% of the time is difficult for everyone, including us professionals. Everyone I speak with is having a hard time, but at least as adults, we have better coping mechanisms. Children do not, and school is the very place that helps them develop to be well-run individuals that are able to handle a variety of situations, not just those situations learned on home. In fact, the largest concern I have is the impact on social development and emotional well-being. We saw the differences, and she even confirmed through several discussions that she needs the interactions and recognized the impact to her. These kids go to school not only for textbook learning, but social interaction, learning of group norms and building of networks. School is a critical aspect of their emotional and mental well-being, and there were far too many days where we were concerned about her state of mind, and we're just counting the days until the school year ended. We need to balance the physical, emotional, and social needs of our children. It is my belief that the choice between hybrid and distance learning was and is the best solution. This gives parents the ability to assess the needs of their specific child and of their household and do what is best. And while I understand it's likely a large task to develop this learning model is necessary, COVID-19 is not going away, so it is imperative that we start now with our new norms. We need our children getting the physical, social, and emotional support they need. We need to allow parents like my husband and I to begin getting back to normal. This begins at home, and we need the district support to allow our children to learn via a hybrid model and get out of the house to allow interactions with others. This is what community is about. We need the school district to share their part of this burden, and we will share ours as parents. I know it's hard. I run a company that had to figure out how to operate this environment. We need you to do your part and not take the easiest way out. Please, this is important to us as parents, professionals, and community members. If you're looking for a parent representative to help out, I know I carry my bias as a parent and a corporate professional, not that of an educator. However, I believe if you invite the right viewpoints to the table, you will get the best outcome for kids, staff, and our community. I've been an Edina mathematics teacher for the past 27 years. I have written you earlier this month, and now after being informed of my teaching placement for this upcoming school year, I'm deeply concerned. I'm not only concerned for the safety of my new students, but also for my family. As I write this day before the official start of my 28th year in Edina, the one thing that I have learned since the middle of March is that I miss being in the classroom and I miss seeing my students in person. That being said, I requested and asked for accommodation I could continue teaching remotely from my home. I have a medical condition, and my wife has an autoimmune disorder. My doctor has recommended that it would be in my best interest to teach remotely. I have provided this teacher with my doctor's letter. I wasn't asked to provide the letter, yet my assignment for the upcoming year is the hybrid model. As of now, my main complaint is that employees are not informed of how these decisions were made. Who were the people that decided who was hybrid, who was an EVA teacher? What was the criteria that was used to guide this process? How many teachers requested EVA? How many teachers are granted EVA? And what is the process for asking for other accommodations after teaching remotely was denied? I'm asking you to follow the guidelines that have been put in place by Governor Walz. School districts must allow school staff whose health risks, or who have members of their household whose health is at risk to work from home to the extent possible. Myself and my colleagues have shown that teaching from home works and is safe for everyone. One thing that I know is if I teach in the hybrid model this year, I will do everything in my power to keep my students safe. But will all of my students and their families do the same? All this virus needs is for there to be one large gathering in someone's cabin, one pool party, or one graduation party to infect a few and bring it into my classroom. And as of now, the only PPE that I'm going to be provided is essential workers, a mask, and a bottle of cleaner. Please consider a decision to start school year in hybrid at the beginning of the school year. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. So thank you for everyone for reaching out to us, providing me with your comments. Like I said, that was a representative sample of some of the emails we received. We did receive more. Thank you. We're going to move on to our discussion for the night. And since we moved the Legislative Action Committee and Board meeting agenda review to the end, we're going to start with the 2020-2021 school year planning. And I'm going to turn it over to John to walk us through this.
Right. Thank you, Chair Ellenberg, members of the board. So we did meet with you on August 6th, the models, and gave some detail to the hybrid model. Of course, a lot of work has been done since August 6th. And just for background, the Hennepin County numbers also changed today. They give us those numbers on Thursday. Last week it was at 23.77 cases per 10,000. The reading today was 21.76. So good news with that is that it is coming down. So that is as background. We've continued working primarily on the staffing of the hybrid model and of course of the EVA. At the last board meeting and also through some emails, there were some questions that came up that I thought we should just review. One of the questions was related to talent development. And I'm going to turn it over to Deb Richards and Jody D. St. Hubert to provide what talent development would look like in those models. So Deb, can I give it to you?
Yes. Good evening, and thank you, Chair Ellenberg and members of the board. In your packet, I've listed some of the features of advanced academics this coming year. And I just want to start by saying that we're really well poised to meet the needs of all of our learners. And for many years, we've collaborated together and use a common learning platform, Schoology, to provide content and to provide different videos for kids when they need some additional help. So I guess if I just kind of review the main points is that advanced academics will be delivered virtually this year. And that will allow us to service both the students who are in the virtual academy along with the students who are in the hybrid. When schedules align, the students will be able to participate together. A couple of things we learned from the fall is that students really wanted to have interaction with their peers. So we're going to be intentional this year of allowing the kids to work in groups and making sure that they have those peer connections. Another thing that we heard is that students really wanted that individual time with their teacher. So we're going to continue providing opportunities for kids to meet individually with their advanced academics teacher and provide feedback. And the other thing that they really talked about is what we learned from last spring was that parents really wanted to ensure that their kids were growing. So again, we're going to be very intentional of making sure that families understand what the learning targets are and where their child is at in terms of progress towards those learning targets. I'm not sure if we're going to ensure there's rigor and challenge. We're going to continue to go at the same pace that we normally did. The teachers will be providing live synchronous lessons. I want to be careful because that might not happen 4 days out of the week. There might be some times when flipped instruction works. And we, again, want to collaborate with the classroom teachers. So we want to make sure that when the students are in the regular homeroom class, when the AA teachers are available virtually, that we are, that it's a good fit for the other students that are in the class. We want to be mindful of that. So again, it might be individually delivered a little differently between grade levels or sites. So specifics are yet to come, I guess, as we experience what this is going to look like, what it's going to feel like, and how teachers respond to this. But I think we're well poised, again, just to make sure that that these students will have equal opportunity to services regardless of the learning model that they've chosen, and that there'll be direct interaction with an advanced academic teacher. I think another really exciting thing about this is in the past, I think classroom teachers often were not as involved in what was actually happening in advanced academics. So we have an opportunity this year for classroom teachers to see what their students are working on in advanced academics. I think the other thing that we learned is that we talked a lot about engagement and how do we engage students. And our team has been working on creating some project-based lessons and some other ways for kids to engage. And so those same resources will be available to the classroom teacher. So during their math and reading block, if there are other students that are ready for some other type of activities, that will be available to anyone in the classroom that is ready for that. So there'll be, again, some sharing of resources, and this allows us to be a little innovative and to try some new things. So we're really excited as a team. So maybe see if any of you have questions.
You take questions on each part, or you want to go through a few more things? Anybody have any questions for Deb since it's on this topic?
I just have one quick question. I think this is great. Did you share any resources or communication with the Minnesota Council of Gifted and Talented too, and what other districts are doing? Is this a model that's being used across the board, or is this unique? And just a little bit more about kind of tapping those resources that we have at a state level.
So are you asking if I've interacted with my colleagues in other districts to see how they're delivering services?
Yeah, that's the question. Yes, thank you.
I feel like all of the districts are kind of in the same spot that we are. They're still trying to figure this out. And I'm not sure that, if you have a school district that has a school within a school, that kind of presents maybe some different opportunities. But so I guess the answer is not really. I haven't explored that just because I feel like we're still trying to figure out what this looks like. And I feel like they're kind of in the same spot we are. Yeah. But I know there'll be future conversations, and this isn't to say that we won't adjust what we're doing, right? We might find that this looks really good on paper, but it isn't what's best for kids, and we will adjust accordingly. So we'll certainly I meet regularly with coordinators from around the metro area, and so that certainly will be a topic of conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Deb.
Other questions?
I just have a quick clarification question. So what I read in my packet was that for advanced learning math and reading, that would be delivered if you are in the hybrid model. When you're at school, it will be delivered through technology. Is that right?
Correct.
And so, and they will be in the classroom while the other students are learning their math or their reading or doing their math assignments. They will be in a synchronous, likely, I heard you say it's not necessarily, but likely in a synchronous class, interacting with their advanced learner teacher. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, but they won't be having to do all the, we've been struggling with making sure that it's just not more work.
Yes, absolutely. So the advanced academic teachers are their core math or reading teacher. So they are supplanting what's happening in the regular classroom. And that will continue.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Any other questions?
I've got a quick one. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lenny. Go ahead.
So Deb, so accelerated math, for example, will be offered.
Correct. Yep.
Janie?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, just reaffirm what I'm assuming is a partial reason for this is to keep kids in the classroom, to mitigate movement, and that being such an important part of what we're trying to do to get all kids back in the classroom, that this is an opportunity for that to happen. I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding that part of it correctly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And regardless of the learning model that you selected, you will receive the same service. It might be when you're in the virtual academy that your math block doesn't exactly line up with the kids in the hybrid. So we're going to have to adjust and figure that out. But we are committed to making sure that kids have personal interactions with their teacher, personal interactions with their peers, and they have access to the same content. And so that's our commitment.
Thank you, Deb.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any other questions, but I just want to make sure. Oh, did you, Owen, do you have a question? Oh, no, okay.
Okay.
Oh, you do have a question, Owen?
I do. I've been struggling to turn my mute
Okay.
off. It's been very laggy. Quick question, Deb. Are we still committed to UMP-de-UMP? What's that looking like now in this era of COVID?
So UMP-de-UMP is still, we still have quite a few families or students that are engaged in that. I just got a list actually just the other day of students that are participating in this. I can't tell you for sure how the University of Minnesota is conducting courses, but I know that we still have students that are participating in that program.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, so thank you, Deb, for going over all of that.
Yeah,
I
nice
appreciate
to
it.
see all of you.
Yeah.
Okay, we should give an update on childcare. There are some changes that have occurred. Please know that as we're doing this planning, there are things that are changing outside of us that we have to continually adapt to. So I want to give Val a chance to give an update on childcare and probably some information on early childhood family education.
Okay.
Val? There she is. I think
You're on
muted. You're muted, Val.
You're still muted. Nope. There we go.
There you go.
There you go.
Sorry, I was plugged in. Now my family has to hear me, but that's okay.
No problem.
Let's go with childcare. We are excited to be working alongside our elementary peers, and community education will be providing after-school care 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And on Wednesdays, we will be managing the entire day of what we're calling a pause or a distance learning day for students and parents. And on Wednesdays, we'll be able to have both our Tier 1 families and space and capacity of staff permitting. We will also be serving families beyond Tier 1. Our after school will also be a combination of Tier 1 and students that have families that are non-Tier 1. We're continuing to work with Josh Jansen, who is the point person for Tier 1 services on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And he and we have a meeting tomorrow to kind of cull through the process for determining whether the registration, the process to know who's actually eligible and what schools they are at, so we can make sure that our principals understand how many students in the Tier 1 will be at each of their elementary schools. So I think between us, we're using the skills and talents we bring to the table to make sure that we are both serving our Tier 1 and our community families to the best that we can. Finally, we are looking at spaces outside of the district if we need to. We would like to see a couple weeks in to phase in additional care for families that are non-Tier 1 in spaces through the Edina Public Schools, but on sort of the back burner, we're looking at spaces outside of the schools to see if that does not, if we can't find additional spaces. We have a lot of families with childcare needs right now, and doing the very best we can to stay connected to them and give them the most up-to-date information that we have. Are there any questions on that?
I don't see any, Val.
Okay. I'll move on to early childhood. As we continue to talk about after during the spring, we offered some online delivery of both parent ed and family ed, as well as preschool online delivery. Mixed reactions. Parents like it. It's a little bit harder to engage families at a robust level with their littlest learners. We took some time this summer to wait for the governor's direction and look at our registration numbers. Meanwhile, both Leah and I have been connecting regularly with the directors from most of the Lake Conference and beyond to kind of all share information and strategies. Collectively, we have decided at this stage we're going to begin the year in September with serving our 3 and 4-year-old learners. We did unfortunately have to let our parent educators know that for this September, we did not have any parent education classes that were full or ready to be full. And so we are asking them to stay with us as we continue to reimagine what parent education and early childhood family education can be in the world of COVID. Health and safety and registration numbers really are driving how we are programming right now. So we are working hard to balance a lot of different needs and spaces to be able to deliver the best quality 0 to 5 programming that we can. So we look forward to phasing in, beginning with 3 and 4-year-olds, and during September, working with a small group of staff to look at what we can start phasing in October when we know more, feel confident about the protocols that we have in place, and can begin bringing potentially more adults into our building.
Questions? Jamie?
Val, does that also include the ECFE early childhood family education? I want to make sure that we are keeping not only our focus on the early learners as children, but also that family education piece. So does that include potentially looking at different ways that we can offer the family education component of ECFE, whether that be virtually, small group without kids present, outdoors, anything like that. I just want to make sure that we're thinking of being creative to keep the focus on the importance of that component of ECFE.
No, thank you for asking that, Janie. We've had conversations with several of our teachers about outdoor babies and me, of course, weather dependency in the fall, but if we can do a short class. Babies are a funny one because they come when they are born. So typically, again, we get rolling numbers in early childhood family education. People will join us as the need arises. With our toddlers, the response, honestly, last spring to online early childhood family education was tepid. And so that's where we're really leaning on our peers from other districts to share ideas and best practices. Good news, bad news is they're not getting any more registrations than we are. The good news part of it is we're continuing to try to figure out the landscape out there with more competitors than ever in terms of people hiring their own parent educator to come in and do a class at home. AMA, which is another parent education component where families get together. So we really need to be thinking differently about our strategies on how to make sure that that remains a cornerstone of our programming, because we certainly believe in it, and I think our families do. And so just know that that's where we want to take our couple of weeks to pivot from launching our 3 and 4 year olds and then spending time with staff to sort of collectively think about brainstorming and reaching out to our parents in a little bit different manner.
Okay. And also just to kind of follow up on that. So what are your plans on reaching out to families to find out what the interests are? You know, I mean, my kids are older now, but I know that when they were babies, those classes were critical to my survival. And I think it just shaped the way our family is. And I'm wondering how you anticipate hearing the voice of parents and wanting to know what they are interested. You know, obviously things are very different in today's day and age with COVID, and kind of surveying them to find out what topics are of interest and maybe what age groups are the most important for that family education piece. So I'm just wondering how you're hoping to get that information.
So we did spend a large amount of the summer connecting with our current registered families, and also connecting. We have about a 18 to 20 person early childhood family education council that we keep tabs with to kind of get their take on it. We are also, I have staff that are exploring some of the online immediate parent education social media networks that are going on, so we can get some families and some input from that. Why that, not in person? Again, we went back to all of our registered families, because we did registration in February, to ask how comfortable they would feel coming into the building, parent-child. That was not a large comfort level, because the amount of people and the unpredictability of people coming in and out of the building was a little unsure, especially when we didn't get information until late July. So we're working with our cultural liaisons also to talk to us about a different audience and where we can. In the past, we've also done parent education and early childhood family education in different apartments and other spaces outside of our building. So those connections are being explored. I've got some pretty good staff that are looking at ways that we can find out what parents of today, the times, the places, because we've tried Saturdays, we've tried evenings, we've done a lot of things and have pretty good success pre-COVID. Now we need to look at, with COVID, how do we continue to have that success, and where is the best location or medium, whether it's virtual or not. You know, from your own family experience, it's so personal that the online doesn't feel like I'm sitting in a room with people kind of bearing my soul about one of my most precious assets. So that's a little bit more conversational that we need to have with parents about how we can replicate that feeling for them.
Okay.
Any other questions for Val? Julie?
I just have a quick one. You answered several of them in the presentation that you just gave, Val. So thank you so much. That really helps me understand where ECFE and how we came from last year to where we are now to have this pause. My only question and thought is, so will we be tapping some of the parent educators to help us with the planning for what the new phase looks like? And do we have plans to do that? I know some of this is marketing, some of it is, there's a lot of different things at play here. I'm just curious what your plans are to tap that resource that we have that knows our community so well and already has connections with families and relationships with our families. So if you could just address that, that would be excellent.
Yes, in our conversations with them and in our correspondence, we have said we will bring a team of them in to help us talk about what about the classes that we had available that people are not as interested in, and how do we tweak those and deliver something different. We're also working with our building principals and some early conversations with special education to talk about the mental health side of that and how the expertise of potentially our parent educators could be a part of that. They are not mental health professionals, so please don't hear that from me, but they do know family education and family supports very well. And so I think that we can utilize them in some ways that we have not in the past in terms of supporting our early elementary families.
That's great. That's great creative thinking at the elementary schools. That's great. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Val.
You're welcome.
Val, I have a question if I could jump in, Erica.
Yep.
My family got a lot out of ECFE and I did too. I'm a little bit unclear here. Is it that the response was tepid to online ECFE or was it tepid in general? Could you qualify that, please?
Sure. Thanks for asking that, Owen. It was tepid to online. Kind of
Okay.
what I was speaking to Janie. It's more of a personal, especially like with some of our earlies. It's the child and the parent together with the parent educator and the teacher, and that creates a pretty full space.
I just remember the dynamic was so personal, and to do it online, it's about half the experience. Since we have been moving toward a hybrid model in principle, could we have in-person classes, or is it that the families are not comfortable with that? I wasn't quite clear with what you said about that.
Yeah, I don't think we have hard no's. What we know, though, is we are starting with health and safety as our primary foundation for delivery. And what we will do is like what we did with our summer programs, we will not invite adults into the building. So when our older students come in as preschoolers, they're going to come in without their parent, with a staggered drop off and teacher meeting him at the door. Our hope is that as we settle into that and we determine additional spaces in our building, because we're still partnering with early childhood special ed, that we're able to think about smaller pods. How do we bring in maybe 4 parents and 4 children at the same time with a teacher? That kind of ideas. I do not anticipate a long pause before we have some parent education and early childhood early childhood family education. I anticipate a month pause where we launch and then we learn and then we're able to move on to another phase of engaging our families and students.
Okay. So the driver is basically we're not comfortable having parents in right now, but perhaps in a month we will be open to that.
Or different space. Again, yes, we're that's when we have the time, because summer is an interesting thing. We've had a small amount of us working on multiple phases, as you guys of all people know. And so we need to open up that window of who is helping us figure out the next thing for us and, next spaces, et cetera. So I'm very confident we'll get there. I don't have that answer of delivery today.
Okay, great. Thank you, Val. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Ellen?
So my question is less on early childhood, more on parent guardian support for distance learning. And I'm just wondering, so this is a community ed question more for you. And I'm just wondering if you could explain to the board what you might have in mind for this. It's a big need for parents to understand their expectations and perhaps how to help their children achieve the best that they can have with a distance learning model. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what your plans might be.
That's a great question, Ellen. Our coordinator, Cheryl Gunnis, has been meeting with Sean Beaverson and Mike Walker to kind of just talk about what kind of deliveries we could do in a virtual method to support different groups, different parent groups. Again, I think I mentioned that with special services, the idea of how do we use the expertise of our parent educators to complement any social emotional learning that we may want to deliver? How can they be a part of that delivery system? So that's community ed is an interesting entity. We surround and complement what the delivery systems are, and we've all been hands on deck in making sure that our schools are up and ready, and we're welcoming all of our learners from 0 to grade 12. Now we get to, and all the supports are also being discussed, but I think that will be more front and center as we begin the school year, to talk about how do we integrate all those parent supports into the models that we have.
Great. Thank you, Beth.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else for Val? I think that's it. So thank you, Val, for all your work and explanation.
Yeah.
I appreciate
the
it.
time, and please don't hesitate if you have more questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So one last area before we get into our scenarios, I wanted to give Mary Hyman and Eric Hamilton and Mary Whitey just a chance for them to comment on. They've been working very hard and diligently on facilities, safety protocols, and then communicating that. At the center of the state's expectation is that we have protocols communicated, protocols practiced, and that as we bring in more and more individuals back to the school year, with our teachers coming back next week, as well as our students coming in on the 8th of September, I just wanted to give Eric and Mary a chance to just update the board and the community on regards to the facilities. So I don't know if Eric, do you want to just kick this off a little bit? It might be review from what you've done before, but
sure, I can start. Yes, we've continued to work on the plans beyond what we've talked about in the past. So we've had a complete checklist for our head engineers to review each building's mechanical systems, and they've gone through, done the check that we requested, signed off on that check, and sent it back to me. We're working with the head engineers about cleaning protocol, and we continue to work on those procedures so that the elementaries are clear on what their responsibilities are as compared to the secondary buildings because of the difference around lunch distribution. So we're continuing to work through those procedures. We have borrowed some plastic barriers from the city of Edina. They use them for elections. So we're using those as a temporary. We've placed a pretty good size order for our barriers. The state of Minnesota has committed to providing us masks, both adult and student, and shields. And I just heard that they're planning on having those masks available to us early next week. And so I'll be working with the nurses department to determine how many per building, get them distributed early to mid next week. I don't know if there's other questions around mechanical systems or cleaning or any of those procedures. Otherwise, Mary, Do you have a few thoughts you want to share?
Marion, how do you want to do this, Chair?
Oh, go ahead. You have a question, Owen? Oh, you're on mute.
There. Sometimes it's hard to get off of mute. Eric, so you just said something about plastic barriers. Is this a short-term loan? How many of these? I think there'd be a number of teachers who'd be interested in having some kind of plexiglass barrier in their classroom. Have you talked about deployment? Are you getting into that? Do we have I imagine the demand initially might be greater than the supply. Do we have other sources for some plexiglass? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. You obviously asked several questions there, but in short, they're really designed for the facing public employees. So if you're a receptionist, if you're going to have multiple people coming to your space, it's not designed for teachers. Teachers will have their face shield available to them. And so if you're a receptionist, main front desk at a school, we'll have plexiglass there. We've talked about a location like around a nurse's office. We've talked about a location around if the media centers are open and they're distributing books out of that space at that media center where multiple people are coming up to that. It's different than a kind of a teaching setting, if that makes sense. And then there's a lot of variants that we have to kind of work through. Special ed has been one variant where it's a little more face-to-face conversations, and so we'll be working through those. The good news is we placed a pretty good order. We should have that at the end of the week. We have the barriers that we borrowed from the city, and they said we could have those until the end of October. So if we see that the order that we made, it wasn't enough, we'll have plenty of time to get more and work our way into it.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be working with the nurse's office on recommendations on locations. We won't be able to provide one for every single person who asks for one, but we'll be able to provide them where the nursing department determines that it's most critical, and we're going to get the most bang for our buck because we're trying to work off of and you'll hear this many times, it's a layered system. It's one thing is not going to solve all of this. It's going to be multiple layers.
Part of the reason for my questioning is we have received a lot of emails from some teachers who are very concerned about their safety. They are going to be in the classroom. They requested virtual, but they're going to be given hybrid. And I'm just thinking about raising the comfort level of some of those teachers. And have you actually received requests from them? And is there any plan for everything is up in the air and so much is being planned on short notice, and some things are experimental, but I imagine some teachers might be interested in having a plexiglass booth in their classroom. So sort of an open-ended discussion here. First, have we received specific requests for plexiglass in classrooms by teachers?
Oh, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Nikki, who's been working with the teachers on accommodations, because I think she can answer your question about teachers.
Okay, and then before we jump to Nikki, Eric, do we have supply? Because I imagine every school district in the state is requesting plexiglass. Are the suppliers backlogged? Are the orders going to take 90 days? Are they going to take 2 weeks? Do you know what the supply chain is on plexiglass right now?
The location that I've ordered it from, it's a fairly quick turnaround. I can't say what it's going to be in the future, but I'm not concerned about getting it in time. And they've been more than receptive to providing whatever we wanted to order. So I can't say what their supply chains look like.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So if I could just make a comment, Eric, with working with Eric, there are a number of things that are coming into play here, and to kind of the basic format for the foundation for this is staff training, and that's around wearing a face covering, hand washing, being comfortable with what does it mean and what are we looking for when we're talking about COVID symptoms and social distancing. Then you can jump into the looking at who would need a plexiglass barrier. And that's going to be related to the type of instruction and the classroom setup that they have. If we need to stay 6 feet away for less than 15 minutes. And so if you're, special education, maybe you're working in a classroom with students who are deaf and hard of hearing, multilingual learners. There are different categories of instruction that will give them a little bit of a higher priority. And I know that Nikki can add some additional information in that, but those are the sorts of things we're looking at right now. But the one thing that's critical, and we're working on a training that'll be all staff for next week for an hour, will be all these, what we're calling a safe learning space. And we're talking about social distancing and masking and hand washing and social distancing and COVID screening and exclusion. And those are the sorts of things that are just fundamentally, we have to do this. And then we'll look at those things like not additionally, but those are the sorts of things we've been working on that play right into this.
And Nikki, do you want to explain the accommodations?
Yes, actually, I can. Owen's question is perfect timing because I was responding to a question just on that, and I was working with both the employee and the building on that plexiglass barrier and how it was going to make the employee feel more comfortable. So your question is timely. These are just a lot of individual conversations after we made the placements into both hybrid and EVA, and we are working through those. And yes, we are making the plexiglass barriers for those people who need them for accommodation purposes.
So we have the supply for those who would like it and those who need it. We can provide it.
I've been working with the individual buildings and none of them have indicated that it will be an issue obtaining them. So I don't think we have a supply issue.
Okay.
Ellen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have actually a few questions. I think this is really an important topic for me in order to make sure that our staff are kept safe and our students as well. So we were talking a little bit just recently. This is the topic of protecting vulnerable populations. And there's a section in the Minnesota Stay Safe guidelines about that. And part of that, the requirements is to have a plan in place to address requests for alternative learning arrangements or work reassignments. And I was wondering, since we did receive many letters from staff who appear to be on the what CDC considers to be high risk for severe illness due to COVID-19, that did not get their distance learning assignment requests honored. I was just wondering if you could tell me what the plan is that Edina has with respect to vulnerable populations.
So, Ellen, I think we'll get to that when we talk about the model. So that's a good question, and we'll get to that. I guess that gets to the accommodations that Nikki just alluded to, but I think we'll go into more detail on once we talk about the model.
Okay. I also have some questions about air filtration, and I was just wondering, this is more for Eric, if there are standards for air exchanges per hour for classrooms or other spaces in our buildings, and if we meet the standards with the increased ventilation that was mentioned in this plan, and if there. I'm just wondering what level of filtration is incorporated into our ventilation systems. I'm wondering about the possibility of upgrading our filters to HEPA filters or supplying classrooms with HEPA filters.
I think I've heard a few questions. HEPA filtration. So HEPA filtration is difficult. It's not, our buildings are not designed as medical facilities. So our systems, our air handling systems, are not designed to handle the increased filterization of air like a hospital is. So we don't have the capability to install HEPA filtration in our air handling systems. We install the highest grade filter that each air handling system can handle. And we've done that, and we've had an independent review by our air filter supplier. We've had them walk each site, work with each head engineer, and review the filtration at each building and each air handler. And and we're confident that we've installed the most high grade filter that the air handling system can handle at each location. HEPA filtration within the classroom. I asked IEA, our health and safety consultant, to review that and look at it. They, at this point, are not recommending individual HEPA filtration. I don't have the verbiage in front of me, but there's multiple. It comes down to space, and every space is unique, and the size of filtration that's required to filter that air. And their recommendation at this point is number one, I don't know that you could get the HEPA filtration for every single classroom and provide that. I only know of one district right now that has even entertained that idea. As a district, we have focused on where the greatest impact for a HEPA filtration was going to be, and we ordered one for every nurse's office, and that will be supplied before the start of school. That's where the sick are going, and that's where we're going to focus to actually put the right-sized HEPA filtration in the room. I forget your first question. I'm sorry.
If there are standards for cycling air.
So our buildings meet the Minnesota code for air distribution within the building. We ourselves are going to bypass our energy efficiency and open up the outside air damper to supply as much fresh air into the space as possible based on weather conditions, obviously. And for certain areas, I know I've had requests from the music department on air changeovers per hour, and I've provided that information to the schools. I still am waiting on the high schools, and I'm hoping I'll have that by tomorrow for the air changeover. But that was mainly on the music area where they were concerned about how heavily they're breathing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And so just to get back to the HEPA filters, and I know that some PTOs have mentioned that they are looking into possibly supporting the schools in different ways. And I was wondering if you could give me your just your thoughts on whether or not that would be a type of project that a PTO or Ed Fund that would a HEPA filter per room is some project that might be explored.
I personally have concerns about it. I have concern. So when I purchased HEPA filtration for the nurse's office, I looked at a 10-year product, a high quality 10-year product that's going to last a long time. Going to be able to be sized for the room, not be loud, so it's going to be quiet. So they're not cheap. And I was able to get the 10 that I was required, and I'll have those before the start of school. I think there's many, many factors that have to go into buying a HEPA filter. And then just to say you're going to put one in every classroom, some classrooms are massive. And so you can't just do the square foot, you have to do the volume of the space within that. So if you have a music room, are you going to put a HEPA filtration in that room? And is it going to work just like a standard classroom? And so it's not an easy solution. And we're looking at it, the district's looking at it as a multi-layer effect to say where does it make the most sense to get the most coverage with all of our time, energy, and dollars. And that's why I had our health and safety consultant look at it. I hired a mechanical engineer look at it. And both sides looked at it and just said that they weren't in agreement to put all of our energies in that location. I think our greater energy is in teaching our kids and forcing our kids to follow the protocol of washing your hands, covering your face, and both inside the district and outside the district. And that's going to be the greatest impact on all of us, I believe.
Okay.
Now, with that said, does a HEPA filtration work? Yes, it's proven to work if it's sized right, if it's not noisy in the classroom. It could have an incremental impact on the air, but I don't believe it's the solution.
Thank you, Eric.
You bet.
Any other questions for Eric? Matt, sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, no, Eric, thanks for all you're doing. And I know you've consulted many experts, internal and external to the school, around the engineering and planning. Same way that Steve's doing the same thing with technology and safety and tracking in the district. So I don't want to ask questions that are redundant, but just one topic that keeps coming up is as we shift and do planning around the buildings for classroom engagement, there's some specific areas, specifically high school basement or others, that keep coming up in emails as zones where people are less comfortable being or more congregation takes place. Are we working in a coordinated fashion around where we're placing active classrooms while students are in a hybrid fashion? So meaning, are we actually Xing out certain classrooms or certain areas as part of our plan?
Matt, thank you for the question. I can't answer that question. That would be part of the high school administration. As far as areas of concern, if there are areas of concern that you've heard, please send them to me. I know we've had discussions around that lower level of the high school. I know I've had it reviewed by both our health and safety consultant and the mechanical engineers for providing fresh air into those spaces. We do monitoring of the air almost every year. So if there's still something that's lingering out there that you know of, I would like to hear it and get ahead of it. But as far as crossing out classrooms, that's an administrative thing, and I haven't heard that they're going down that path.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Eric.
You bet.
Julie?
Yeah, actually, I have another question that's similar to what Matt just asked. I know in our elementary school we have flexible seating, and so we don't have traditional desks for separation. So what is our plan for the physical space and where students will sit in the elementary schools that have, shared tables and different levels? Like, has that been evaluated, and is there a need for purchase of more seating that can be separated?
Sure. I'm sorry, I honestly cannot answer that question. I worked with a couple principals on a couple specific questions that they had within their space. So unless you had the example that you're thinking of, I honestly can't answer that question. The principals in individual buildings have been working with their individual classroom spaces, and unless they're running into a roadblock, I have not participated in that portion.
Karen, Chris, Andy, Sean, Tim, can you put any knowledge behind that or thought through that? I know that's probably...
Sure. I can talk a little bit about the classroom spaces. We've mocked up a classroom for one of our first grade classrooms. And on average, looking at where we're at with registration for hybrid and EVA sections, we'll be able to use about all of our desks, and then students that aren't seated at a table, not a desk, a table, we're purchasing clipboards for all of our students so that if they're if they're not at a desk, they do have a writing surface, they'll have a chair, they're socially distant from each other, and they can, so those students might be seated towards the front where there's some more direct instruction from the teacher, and the students at the desk might be doing some more independent, or the tables might be doing more independent work. But we've got a solution that we think will work despite the fact that we have some more flexible furniture with the upgrades that we did a couple years ago.
So just to clarify what I heard, so you said the students will have clipboard that will sit on their lap and that will be their writing space? Is it?
So there are probably in any given classroom 10 tables that students could be seated at. To accommodate students above and beyond that number who will need a writing surface, we purchase clipboards so that students will have their own personal clipboard that they're able to write on. Let's say you're doing a lesson up at the front of the room. We're trying to keep kids socially distant. We don't have the number of tables that we need, but we have clipboards that they can use to write on. And then they can access those other tables after they're cleaned and we switch.
I would also add that when we purchased the flexible furniture, different grade levels had different configurations or different pieces that they chose. In our primary classrooms, many of them have more tables or different options of tables where we can, have kids sitting at either end. So we're distancing them in that way. But for example, at Countryside, and I know some of our other buildings in our intermediate classrooms, our 3 through 5 classrooms, we have individual student desks. They're movable. They raise, they lower, they're on casters so they can be moved around. And that will allow us to accommodate more students with a more formal writing place. In addition to the clipboards, and I know all the elementary buildings have purchased the clipboards too. So I think what we're trying to do is to continue that idea of flexibility in having kids continue to have a choice. Is it a standing desk option or table option? Is it flexible seating that we've chosen in the past? But giving teachers some options for how can they move kids around comfortably while still meeting their needs for how they are going to complete their work.
Hi, this is Sean, and we have mocked up, hi everyone. We have mocked up also a classroom at Valley View, and we've taped it up, and we've arranged our high top tables, our rolling chairs with the little arm on them, and our desks and tables. And we think that at Valley View, there's a number of classrooms that are really similar to one another. So we're mocking one up, and we're going to go and do other classrooms around the building. And then we're going to work with staff on a one-to-one basis to check in and consult with them and make sure they're feeling comfortable with the arrangement. But we are giving staff some exemplars that they can look at and tour around and see.
Lenny, I saw you had a question.
So this probably goes to the other area, but as long as we're on this topic, on a typical first grade class in elementary, how many students do you expect to have on a given day? Or is it like the 10 to 12 number?
We're actually working on that right now. At the elementary level, in many of our building sections, has been decreased because of a certain number of students participating in the EVA program, our virtual academy. I guess I could turn my camera on so you can actually see who's talking tonight, right? The class lists and our placements are being revised as we speak. For instance, at Countryside, my neighborhood classrooms reduced from 3 sections to 2 sections. So I've compressed those class lists into 2 sections. Now it's a matter of determining how many of those are kids that will come to us on Mondays and Tuesdays. In other words, when their last name begins A through K, and then how many will be in our B group coming on Thursdays and Fridays. I will tell you that at the elementary buildings, we are finding that we have a whole lot more A through K students than we do M or L through Z. So there is an imbalance, and we're doing our best to to work with families to maybe create a little bit more balance. Some grade levels are a little bit better than others, but we know that once we get into that 15, 16 range of numbers of kids coming to us, have a few problems with a few classrooms at each one of our buildings. But for the most part, we're probably talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 kids on each of our days. That's a broad example of where we're at. We're going to have some outliers there as we go through this.
Okay.
Any other questions? Great, thank you.
So just to close out, we've been working really hard on understanding the safety protocols, how we are implementing them. Our commitment is to teach our staff safety protocols for them and their movement through the building, as well as the safety protocols to teach them so they can teach students what those safety protocols are. In your packet, you're going to be, there's some background that was written by Nikki Tischer to talk about the masking policy. We are following the state law, the executive order of the governor of masking. When you are in a school, you will wear a mask unless a teacher says you don't have to. There's an example of that. There are some exceptions. One of them is in a Phy-Ed classroom when exercising. So the masking policy is something that we are expecting Edina students to wear, teachers to wear, and if individuals have a difficult time with that, we would place them in the Edina Virtual Academy. The other gold standard to that is the social distancing. You heard how the rooms are being reorganized, reconfigured, how things are being moved in the buildings, signage, all the things that we would do for a group of people coming into a building to remind them and to teach them what 6 feet is. So to social distance. We know social distancing and masking, social distancing being most important, are two safety protocols that will keep the transmission of that virus absent or to at least controlled. We also know, and being an educator, it's best to teach these protocols in a face-to-face setting. So we look forward for our students returning and teaching them these protocols and how they're going to be in classrooms. So with that, that's one very large component of putting this together. These are all laid out by the state, and continue with the next step, which is to put together our virtual learning. So I'm going to turn it over to Randy and the principals just to go through. Oh, there's a question there. Okay.
Yeah, John. Just wondering about compliance with the masking. And so if students are not compliant, they go to EVA. Have you spelled out thresholds, 3 strikes, you're out? Have you worked through specifics on that? How could you talk to that?
We haven't done that yet, Owen, but I would hope that we would take, since we're an educational institution, that we teach the importance of wearing the mask and give the students the opportunity to learn that, and reminders. I even catch myself in this new COVID forgetting my mask on occasion. So we really should be in a place where we're teaching kids that. We haven't set out any guidelines disciplinary wise for that.
I have another question about masking itself and the physical masks. And I don't know, Erica, if this is the time to ask, but it's sort of an extension of Mary and Nikki's questions or answers. If we have teachers who are really uncomfortable, I think I heard Eric say that we're going to get some masks from the state. Are these surgical masks? Could you talk about the quality of these masks we're going to be supplying our teachers with the masks? How's that going to work out?
Yes, the supply of masks are, we have, the state is allowing for a few different things. Each staff member will get one washable mask, so that'll be a cloth style. And we haven't seen these yet, but then I know that they will also be getting, I think, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 disposable masks, and those are surgical grade. And then each licensed staff will also be getting one face shield. So that's the more of a plastic sort of a face shield that I'm sure you've seen. Mm-hmm. And so that's what each staff member will be getting, and then each student will be getting.
Mary, this is Matt. Just to interrupt for a second, sorry. I saw your hand move, but this is the kind of welding shield, not the small 3-inch from the chin up. Just to make sure we're on the same page, right? This is
right. Yes, the face shield goes between your forehead and extends below your chin, and then goes laterally to the side. So full view, or the side is protected as well.
Sorry, I just wanted clarification. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And an offshoot question on that, Mary. The teachers whose faces need to be seen for enunciation and language training, are they going to be given a waiver on not wearing the physical mask as long as they're wearing the shield? Because I understand if you're going to wear the shield, you still need to wear the mask. Is there a special exception here? Could you talk to that?
Well, I think some of the types of instruction are still being looked at. For example, like the speech language providers, I think that they're going to be looked at, and Nikki can probably speak, and Jeff Jorgensen possibly, but they're going to be delivering those services, I know, that virtually as well. But we're still, I think some of those are going to be on a case-by-case basis, but they will have the PPE that's necessary, and then, like a face shield, and then also plexiglass. So, because some of the younger students for the early learning center, for example, the early childhood students, they will, very unlikely that they'll be able to wear a mask as well. They're just too young for that. So if the instructor has, or the teacher has, the plexiglass, and once again, we're going back to the appropriate ventilation in the room, the social distance, the hand washing. And then we have to remember that, we're really asking families to do an assessment of the children coming in, that they're free of any COVID symptoms, so maybe we could postpone the lesson or whatever it is, the face-to-face time until 14 days or whatever the exclusion criteria says, 10 or 14 days, depending on what it is. So we're going to be having to look at all of those things. So it just shows you how complicated it gets.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and this is Nikki. Yes, the new policy, the appendice to the policy, addresses some of those situations. I can't read it verbatim because I'm on the call, but it lists the reasons that somebody would wear a face shield instead of a mask, and I want to call it educational impossibility. And so it goes to some of the situations that Jeff is in, where the kids are teaching, or the teachers are teaching enunciation, but he's looking at other protocols that will help the teachers perform in those venues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so these masks and shields, they'll all be available first day of class?
Yeah, so I just got a note from the state of Minnesota saying that they're going to start distribution on Monday. I'm the point of contact for the district, and as soon as I hear anything, we're going to pick them up. I've already communicated with the nurses department. We'll have numbers to break them down and get them distributed as soon as that day that I pick them up. So yes, is the short answer.
Okay, thank you.
Julie?
Yeah, just a follow-up question. So I understand that that's what the state is providing, one cloth mask and then a couple disposable for every teacher. But realistically, that gets the teacher through 2 weeks of school. I mean, are we as a district, have we put any money aside, or have we looked at supplying our teachers with a stockpile at all the sites so that there is no question that if either a student comes to school without one, or a teacher needs one, or someone gets sneezed on, or all those different things, that we have that backup support. Is that part of our plan?
Yes, we have, I know Eric has actually purchased some, but we've also had some very generous donations from, for example, the Edina Chamber of Commerce had, they gave us some as they gave other businesses in Edina, and I think we've picked up at almost, I think, 5,000 from them. So these are donations that I think we're still waiting for a box. I went and picked up some. So, and we've had some from other community organizations within Edina. And then the donations actually started last March. And so they've been using them in the Childcare and the success programs. So, we're just really encouraging employees as well. They can go above and beyond, and maybe they prefer, because there are a number of styles of masks. Some of them are more comfortable than others, some of them are breathable, but we've let them know that we can provide a number. I know that doesn't relieve all of the anxiety around this by any means, but I do feel confident that we'll continue to build more of our own supply.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
And one other comment is that we are planning on supplying the nurse's office with extra ones if they deem necessary. So they are disposable. They don't last long, but they will have extras on hand if there's an issue. And as Mary said, every mask is unique. And so I have no idea what the state's going to provide. They might provide wonderful ones. They might provide something that nobody likes. I don't know. I know I've tried on multiple kinds and I found a couple that work. And so it's difficult to say we're going to purchase a mask for everybody and then everybody's going to wear that mask. When it's so individual, it's very challenging.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. I think that stockpile is an important clarification for our teachers and staff. I had one other question that I didn't realize was on this part, but it's in here. We have the parents and guardians in schools. So it says schools are closed to visitors and volunteers. Can somebody respond in what does that mean? Does that include all PTO? Does that include everyone who's not a district employee? I'm curious. I had that marked as something I just wanted some clarification on. And is this something that we're starting at the beginning of the school year with this, but the hope is to then move into then allowing some of our essential volunteers, and I say essential, people who are coming in to work with students reading or stock the library or all those different things. So
Julie, I think I'll find the language, but I believe volunteer access to schools is restricted, is what the state has said.
Okay, so that would include then all of our PTOs.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Ellen?
Yeah, actually, I have 3 questions, especially before we move on to distance learning. So these are all these pretty much wrap up my questions about the hybrid model. One, it has to do with bus transportation, and I know the Academy of Pediatricians has recommended plexiglass for bus drivers. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the safety of our bus drivers. And then I have 2 more other questions.
So we did have that question. The state patrol does not allow that to be used for the drivers. So they will need to be masked, and then we are working on social distancing seating on the bus.
And Ellen, the students will be expected to be masked as well.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I think that it's one of the areas that is equally important, and we haven't talked about it very much, but it would ideally, if we could, this is going to be a segue into my next comment about cohorts. In the state of Minnesota Stay Safe Plan, one of the requirements is to ensure that we have social distancing on our buses, and so for transportation, for all of that, I think that's what I'm hearing you're planning. And that's, you're nodding your head. So that makes me happy, because I think that's important. So I'll just go into my comment about cohorts. One of the recommendations from the state is that we develop and keep students and staff in small cohort groups that stay together as much as possible throughout the day and from day to day. Limit mixing between cohort groups as much as possible. And so I'd like to hear how the district is doing this, both in the primary and then also in the secondary.
I can speak to the elementary. Our classroom groupings of students are considered one cohort. We know that in one particular classroom, that teacher is the crossover person. That teacher will be seeing both the A part of their class list, and they will also be spending time with the B part of their list. So in that week's time, those students and their teacher are the primary people who will be in their cohort or in their little bubble. If we have additional staff members who will have access to those groups, we are limiting the number of groups of students our specialist teachers have access to. For instance, we have built our specialist schedule to make sure that our music teacher only has access to 4 classrooms of kids or 5 classrooms of kids over a time, instead of them seeing every student in the building in a 1 week period of time. So we've created schedules to accommodate that. We've also made arrangements at the elementary for our specialist teachers and anyone else who would come in contact with that particular group to be coming to their classroom, so that we're not sending kids to multiple locations in the building, that once they're in their room, they're there. Any services, any additional staff members who are there to support them, might be a paraprofessional or whoever that might be, they're going to come to the kids. As opposed to the kids being out and about in multiple locations. That also goes for scheduling them for lunch. They'll be eating in their classrooms at the elementary level. And then their group or their cohort will stay together during recess times. And they'll also be assigned a location on the playground so that their cohort has a place to be and be together, as well as providing consistent supervision for them. So that same para who has been in their classroom might also be that same para that will be supervising that particular cohort of students as they're out and about in the building. Very limited, of course, but also when they're on the playground or in any other grouping. When they're outside of their classroom, we're going to make sure that there is a consistent adult group that has access to or exposure to that particular cohort of students.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And that extends to the interventions as well, right?
That's correct. We're also working on what the scheduling will look like for that. It will very likely be based on grade level or classroom groupings of students as far as the scheduling goes. Again, limiting the number of groups of students each particular adult has access to. So it might be that we assign our reading specialist to just first grade and second grade, and then a different reading specialist to third grade and fourth grade. So again, limiting the number of adults we're having in contact with particular cohorts of students.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then how are we handling that for these cohort groups in the secondary?
Well, I could say certainly at the high school, to have a comprehensive high school, you have to look at the students registered for over 38,000 requests through registration and all the variety of courses that we do offer. So cohorting is much more difficult because you don't have a single teacher that teaches multiple subject areas. You don't have a teacher that's licensed in chemistry that could also teach the English curriculum and the math curriculum. So there will be movement of kids in the building. So our focus is really more on those numbers, and we're looking at sections based on the alpha split and room capacity. Sections that could be, right now I'm looking at some sections that are as low as 7 or 8 students to some sections really as a maximum of like 18 students in a classroom. I think the only ones that would be larger than that would be like our largest section in the entire building is our concert band. But they're also in a much larger space, cohorted in half, perhaps split with another sectional teacher to make that smaller. And we should be able to manage all that with our 6 feet of distancing. So that's really our focus at the high school, to still be able to run the courses in a comprehensive high school in a safe way. So the ability to cohort is much more complex than it would be in an elementary school.
And hi, Ellen, this is Sean. And the same would be true in middle school. When we have the kids with a number of choices, their cohort is really their A through K group and their L through Z group. And they go through and they, with their choices, and we're afforded so many opportunities for kids, that would be their cohort. I want to reiterate what Karen Bergman said. We are super heavy at Valley View in our A through Ks. So, we just could use a few more L through Zs.
Is that something that the district would be looking at changing at this point, if it makes sense to? I mean, I'm just wondering this. I don't know how we landed with A through K.
It works for all the buildings. There's just a couple of buildings it doesn't work so great for. So I think that we're seeing movement still with students going into EVA. And I think that as we look at that movement, I'm hopeful that we can balance some of the things. We still have some kids at Valley View that we don't have their decision on. So I think there still will be some movement on that. And we'll make the decision at that point, what we can do, maybe ask for volunteers.
Right. Sean, I recognize that's the type of decision that you guys would be great at, but I wasn't sure if you were hinting at the board that you would want us to.
No, we'll manage that one. We'll make it work. But we do have parents asking to move cohorts, and that's a really hard decision. We're pausing on that right now. And we realize that parents are making pods in their neighborhoods and things like that. And there's some constraints with that. And right now at Valley View, we just can't honor those. We are just holding on that until we have better information of how many kids are going to actually move to EVA.
Right. So from what I'm hearing, my concern is on the number of teachers and students being exposed to different students. It has this multiplier effect. In the way that our district and all districts handle secondary classes. So I was very interested when the recommendations came out about these cohorts, and I was hearing about different districts exploring different ways of making that happen, possibly on I know that it would limit total class choice for some students or whatever, but it does definitely limit the exposure of the virus to our staff and our students. And so I'm just wondering if the district has looked at the possibility of trying to create cohorts for secondary in order to limit the exposure to the teachers. And I'm just curious about that.
You'd substantially be undoing what we know about the opportunities in Edina. So you could do anything. It's always a trade-off. If you want to create cohorts at the secondary like the elementary has, then you're exponentially cutting down the choices kids have, and you're starting to say, well, maybe we'll just have core classes. Well, then what do you do with the rest of your staff? for example. And so that really isn't a choice in my view. You'd be saying, well, the only option is to go distance learning in that case. And what we heard so often in the spring from families in our focus groups was, it's important for us to have our kids back to school. And we're willing to give up some rigor, or we're willing to give up some breadth, because it's so important to have social emotional connection. It's so important to have that ability to interact with teachers. It's so important to have some of the stuff that really makes education in Edina great. And so you'd be undoing the things that we've come accustomed to in Edina at the secondary level. And
Okay, well, thank you. I've been looking at different models where the teachers actually come to that cohort, and it is the impact on their schedule, on the students' options for specials, et cetera, is minimized. But I am just pushing back on exposing the teachers to as many students as we are currently doing with this model. And so I was trying to come up with my own idea from what I'm hearing, but what I'm hearing is that the cohort or secondary are literally half of the student body at our middle schools, or a quarter of all of the students at a grade level.
So at the high school, you could make it smaller. You could have divide into 25% instead of half. So your cohort is then even smaller, but then your kids come to school less often. So that's another trade-off. You could take AP and general classes and combine those together. It's one class. And so then you could potentially have kids team and stay together, but it's an AP and a general class together. But that puts pressure on both the kids in terms of what they want in the course, and maybe a teacher that has never taught one course or the other. So this is, again, all these trade-offs that Tim is talking about are real. And again, trying to have a comprehensive high school and have that experience is what we're trying to do in a safe way. And so that's what we have with the cohort model of splitting our school in half.
Okay, great. Thank you. My last point is, and I was going to follow up on Owen. Owen's question about what happens when there's non-compliance. We are going to try to be keeping students socially distanced and wearing their masks. But I'm for the safety of all students, I am very concerned that we have a process and plan set out for how we're going to manage non-compliance. And I think that we should be prepared for the fact that there probably won't be total compliance. And I think that we should talk about it as a district, what the plan will be. And so I actually am very uncomfortable on behalf of for parents and students and our staff not to have a plan.
Matt?
Well, I mean, I can address that question. I think it's very much what John said at the beginning is like everything we do in education is developmental and part of teaching, because you could have a kid that doesn't have a mask because they, dropped it in the toilet, and then we would help that kid get another mask for the rest of their day. But if you have a student in your building, and I'll say for the high school, that is old enough to understand what the expectations are, that is completely non-compliant, there would be a warning, communication with the parent, and that day we would hand them a mask. But if it continued, we'd say we have a distance learning option for you. That's what would happen at the high school level. So, but these are individual cases. And also you could look at who the student is. You could look at the age of the student, and all those things come into play about making a decision. So a sort of a blanket rule, sort of 3 strikes and you're out, is not the way that we kind of handle discipline. We want to make sure that we handle it in a respectful way with kids, but ultimately we're not going to let any student make any of us unsafe and kind of wreck all the work that we're working towards. So that's
that. I wanted to hear that definitively, and Andy, you've said it well. So thank you.
Yeah, Erica, you said me next, but I'd rather have Sean go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Hi, thank you. I would just like to say that we had a really good example yesterday at a Valley View Picture Day of how well kids can do. We had 0 problems with students wearing a mask, 0 problems with students social distancing. They were super compliant. They were adorable. The kids did great. We had 800 kids come through and get pictures. It's our biggest picture day ever, including when we had 1,400 kids in our building with 9th grade. We never had 800 kids come through. So it was great to see them, and the kids did great.
Thank you, Sean. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't just going to be all squishy. So thank you. And that's all.
Matt?
Yeah, I was going to affirm the same thing. What I heard Owen ask was, is there a disciplinary policy in place for this? And the answer was no. We're going to let site administrators and teachers handle it appropriately. And there's just such a high level of anxiety and emotions at this point in time across the board. I totally understand that, but this is definitely something that should be handled not at a board level, but in the classroom and at the administration level. So I think what I just heard was great. And I'm sure that the elementary schools also have a good plan in place, that you're not going to handcuff 9-year-olds, but you're going to make sure they put their masks on when they have them and they're well dressed.
Great.
I think next step now is to update you on our planning as it relates to our model of EVA as well as hybrid. Models have not changed. They probably have become more nuanced, and also we have begun the staffing process. So I'm going to turn it over to Randy first to talk a little bit about what work has gone on since we last met, and then we can talk a little bit about the staffing process as it relates to the information that Nikki and principals have been working on. So, Dr. Smazel, are you out there somewhere?
I am. Thank you, Chair Allenberg, Superintendent Schultz, our board members, our staff, and community members that are listening this evening. First of all, before I begin, I do want to publicly recognize our principals and our administrators at each of our sites. They have been putting in huge amounts of hours and problem solving. And we are blessed to have such a talented team working in the district. They are amazing, and they carry that positivity with them every day, despite so many of the challenges that they have as they're trying to work through this. I also want to publicly recognize many of our teacher leaders who have been back early, helping work with teams, trying to figure out and solve some of these puzzles, and some of our district staff who have also been working on that. All of you know how complex this is. It's hard to even describe the levels of complexity and the tiers of complexity that go along with it, but we just try and peel it apart day by day and work on it piece by piece. Right now, for our Edina virtual learning, we have about 1,937 students signed up to participate in that. That's about 23% of our student population. So about 6,000 of our students are currently aligned to hybrid. We have about 5% of our families that we have not had a response back yet from. But we do have a number of buildings who have been able to contact all of their families, and they have responses from all of their families. Or at least they have been in contact with all of their families. I know some of the families are still connecting back to them. We do have teachers back next week. We're excited about being able to see many of our teachers. I know that it's still a challenging time for them. We have 45 new teachers that started some training this week. Principals will be kicking off their welcome back to our teachers at their sites on Monday, and our district workshop day is planned for all staff on Wednesday, August 26th. We have numerous trainings planned that will be available for staff both before school starts and once school begins. And as Mary Hyman mentioned, all staff will complete a protocols and safety training. And we want to make sure that all staff they've been prepared. They understand what those safety protocols are and that we have those in place. Teachers who will be teaching virtually only will have time to connect next week and will also receive training. And we are still finalizing what that training looks like and still working on some of that. Our teachers will also, who are teaching remotely, will also have time to meet across the district and will have time to prepare their curriculum for the fall. Nikki's going to talk a little bit, I think, about the staffing process, and we're still working through finalizing those staff assignments. In some cases, we're realigning work of our paras, and in some cases, we need to hire some additional support staff. So we are tracking on where all those positions are and what's been filled and what isn't. At all levels, we're working to expand face-to-face time for students receiving additional services to include special education and multilingual services. In particular, at the elementary level, once we understand how many students will be participating in the Tier 1 childcare support service at schools, that'll help us finalize the amount of space we have for additional face-to-face time for some other populations of students. In terms of the virtual academy, at the elementary level, we were able to schedule separate sections. We had enough numbers to schedule separate sections. We have about 5 sections at each grade level for our learners. So they will have a specific EVA teacher assigned to them. There'll be approximately 30 EVA teachers at elementary that will be working really as a team across the district to support that learning pathway for families. And we will support those teachers with resources and training and some time to team across the elementaries and with teachers at their home schools on Wednesdays as part of that Wednesday collaboration day and training day. In some cases, students will be combined with students from some of the other schools because the sections were a bit smaller than a typical class. So we had to combine some of those sections to make them work. But we could reframe that and say a positive of that is that they do get to get a jump start on building some of the friendships that would typically not form until they head to middle school. So they'll get to know some other students across the district. EVA classes will include a blend of live teaching and flipped lessons. Teachers will be connecting with students live multiple times per week to teach through virtually through direct instruction, small group discussions, one-on-one conferences, project instructions, Q&A with students. We'll be working with the teachers on how they can schedule that and what that looks like. EVA at the secondary will look a little different than it does at the elementary. When we looked at where students fell in the registration process, we might see that there's 2 students from this course and 3 students from this course and 8 students from this course. And I think at the end of the day, what made the most sense is that students really do remain in their scheduled courses and will be learning virtually with their hybrid peers. Live teaching or synchronous time will be expected for both virtual and hybrid students several times per week. And we really believe this is the best solution that ensures flexibility, adaptability for what might lie ahead and at the same time honoring the course selections of students, as Andy mentioned, and staying aligned to the virtual and hybrid family choice options that they put forth. So week 1 will start Tuesday, September 8th, the day after Labor Day. We'll have orientation at each level. That orientation will support both the hybrid and the virtual learning preparation. For the hybrid, we will have reduced numbers of students in the buildings during that orientation week. And this will provide us some ramp-up time for the models during this fall. During that orientation week, we might have, we'll have students meeting teachers. We'll be really kicking off the fall with building relationships, which is at the heart of any good educational environment. We might have some conferences with some families in some cases, in particular at the elementary level. At the elementary level in particular, assessing the learners and where they're at on their learning continuum around reading and math. We may have some technology to distribute, training for students and for families on the models, additional communication, etc. We have Chromebooks and iPads and textbooks and workbooks and instruments and novels and lots of materials to get to students who will either be learning virtually or will be learning virtually part-time as they're in the hybrid. Week 2, Monday, September 14th, we launched then the regular hybrid and the Edina Virtual Academy in more of its true form. And the one difference is that we're still kind of slow phasing on kindergarten. So kindergarten will start the 4 days a week in week 3, which starts Monday, September 21st. And we'll launch that 4 days per week for kindergarten. And we are drafting up some daily schedules that we'll post on the academic tab of the family dashboard, and those will be available for families next week. And we'll continue to add more specific details on schedules. Additional communications will come from the district to families and from our principals to families. And once the teachers get back and they get their class list, they will also be reaching out to students that are on those class lists. So I'm going to pause there and ask Jody if there's any other details or anything else that you want to add in terms of the thinking around EVA or hybrid.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you, Superintendent Schultz and Chair Ellenberg, board members and community members. I think Randy, you do such a good job of synthesizing all the information, but I'm just going to add a little bit about the instructional model. We've been working hard with teams of teachers, and one thing that we really are doing is committing to best practices in instruction. So teams are looking at being really tight on what we're teaching and looking at standards and pacing, and then designing lessons that are coherent across the schedule. So if you're in hybrid or in distance learning, the learning will build upon each other from day to day. And another two more main goals is that we're engaging kids in activities that provide purpose and connection. So going back to Randy's comment on building relationships and the need for kids to be deeply engaged in the learning. And then we're also really committed within the model that we're providing support and feedback. And that will look different at the different levels and possibly sometimes at different buildings, depending on where the students and the teachers are at. And that support and feedback will come in various forms of flipped lessons or synchronous learning. Sometimes it'll come just in comments and threads and emails with students. So just wanted to add those 4 components that we're working hard to keep as a consistent across the entire system.
Okay. What's that? Nikki, do you want to talk a little about staffing and how we are in the middle of that process? And Nikki's doing a great job with that. So can you talk a little about that?
Of course. And actually, we're on step 8 of a 9-step process. So I was looking back in some of the framework that we originally created for this process. And step 6 was soliciting teacher preference. And so we received those last Monday. And then on Wednesday, of course, we received parental input onto what model that they would like their student to engage in. And so now we're on step 8. So step 7 was the one that happened yesterday, which was the notification to teachers of their placement either in the hybrid format or in the EVA format. And so from that conversation then invokes additional conversations regarding what accommodations may be needed to make that placement fit for the employer or the employee. And so that's where we're at right now, is really starting to engage with the individual employees. And I can say, so far I've had quite a number of successful conversations around plexiglass and masking and cleaning and those types of things to make our employees feel comfortable in the classroom. We have additional ones to do still, and those are some of the ones that I know that are coming to the board also. We're definitely reaching out to our employees just as fast as we can to engage in that process with them to, figure out can that placement work, or do we need to, what other things can we do to make it work? We had about 275 teachers who said that their preference was virtual. But that, what was interesting in the process is we did have people come and or teachers select virtual, but then go to hybrid and then go back to virtual. So there was a lot of conversations, and that's why our principals were key in these conversations and the placements. Is they know their employees well, and we'll continue to work on we have a few additional conversations that need to happen. But like I said, we're just on step 8 right now, and we look forward to engaging in those conversations with our employees.
And Nikki, this process applies not just to the teaching staff, it applies to all employees.
That is correct. Right now, we've been primarily focused on the instructional staff because we want to make sure we get those in place first. But we actually have on our FAQs right now questions for our employees that also lead to the reasonable accommodation process, and there's a form to begin that process. And all of our employee groups we've notified at this point about the existence of the FAQs, so all of our representatives know how do employees engage in this process with human resources. But yes, we do have some paraeducator, and we actually just sent a employee announcement out last night regarding expectations of our office support staff and our paraeducators and other employees, our custodians, our bus drivers during this hybrid model.
Yes, Matt?
Yeah. So, hi, Nikki. Coming into this role, I'm sure you weren't expecting necessarily to have this dynamic at the start. So thanks so much for all your handling and energy you're bringing. It would be inappropriate for me to dive into any specific instances, of course, that we receive emails from at the board level from teachers or otherwise, but I'm glad to hear there is that feedback loop in place. From the perspective of the districts in managing the HR piece, both from a safety and compliance piece and also a liability piece, we know every year the public doesn't see it, but we settle multiple grievances or unhappy situations with employees the way that any company or public institution would. So is there, so in terms of this step 8, is there a series of a review kind of, so, you said with the full teaching staff, you had 270 or 200 and some odd teachers who wanted to do EVA. What are we going to generally kind of boil it down to? Is it going to be a similar ratio to students of 20% EVA, or is it going to be a little bit higher because of the magnitude of the offering has to be delivered in both settings? Just how does that kind of match up at a macro level, just so people understand that?
Thank you for the question. So really, when all those initial placements have been made, and so right now we do have teachers in positions to serve students. Some of the ways that we're serving students may look a little different depending on the person serving the students. So I think the fundamental building blocks have been set, and so now it's refining from that point, and really, like I said, winnowing down where we need to create flexibility, where a placement may need to be refined, if that makes sense. Matt, does that answer your question, or am I not getting quite to it?
That was helpful. What I was looking for a little bit, and maybe this is a Randy or other question with Jody, is to think about just, there's been a lot of questions in general from parents about thinking about, okay, let me just get right to it. At the board level, the conversation we had 2.5 weeks ago was all about safety in the classroom. Got a bunch of emails and feedback. Do people care about EVA, or is that an afterthought? And then we focused on EVA last week. Then I got a bunch of questions about, hey, do you guys care about hybrid, or is it all about distance learning? So next questions we got were, how do you determine classroom size? Is it by number of students at a ratio, or is it by square footage? Do you bring out hula hoops? So the conversation continues to migrate based on the incredible number of conflicting situations that you want to try to find the best outcome for. So all I was asking was, from a numerical basis, as you're sorting out number of teachers applied to EVA, number of teachers applied to hybrid scenario, is that also being done at a ratio, or just how is that being handled at a macro level? This is a governance and operational question, not a tactical question about counting A through K versus A through L. Just how are you thinking about how to address that, and how does that sit?
So I'll just add, Matt, this is Randy. I'll just add that we're using the classroom guidelines as our guidelines for how we staff all of our sections. Now, in the case of EVA, to get them to balance, they might be a little bit less, they might be a little bit higher, but generally we're using those guidelines to balance that out. as best as we can. And it's a puzzle piece with how many kids do we have, how many teachers do we have, how many sections do we have, and where do we have flexibility and where do we not. At the school level, we have looked at we studied our classrooms. We studied how much space we need for students to be safely socially distanced in those classrooms and what that would mean for the capacity of those classrooms. And that's what the hybrid really leverages, is you're only bringing in typically half of the kids. So you're able to fit them into those spaces and keep them socially distanced. Now at the elementary level, if you went into some of the kindergarten classrooms, they're massive. They're really big rooms. And so the capacity is actually, the actual physical capacity is much bigger than the enrollment. But we are still utilizing our guidelines. We're making sure we look at all of our spaces and what they have for a safe capacity limit. And then we are organizing our staffing around those safe capacity limits when we're working on the hybrid model, if that makes sense.
It does. That's helpful.
Okay.
So before we get too far on into this conversation, I wanted to let the rest of the board and community and administration know that the governance committee has been meeting to talk about school year planning, especially related to some feedback we've received from different stakeholders in the community, from staff, from parents, administrators, and our teachers. We have had a lot of wide-ranging discussions regarding options, changes, and opportunities that we have regarding the staffing and the model that is presented towards us. And based on these conversations and the feedback received, Janie, Lenny, and I today are suggesting some additions to the hybrid model being proposed tonight. We have 4 things that we are suggesting to make the hybrid model work better for both the community and the teaching staff. And those first is that we want a commitment from the district to send out communications to parents to better explain how the hybrid model will work, and so they understand the commitments we need from them and their students to make the environment as safe as possible for our teachers and for other students and staff, including but not limited to our masking policy appendix, social distancing, and the expectations we have as far as hand washing and behavior. We feel that we really need a commitment from our community that this program and our expectations are going to work for our staff and for the other students. Additionally, we would like the district to send communications to the city and city-based sports and activity associations, explaining that we need a commitment to follow recommended CDC safety rules, such as masking and social distancing, when our students are outside of the classroom. We know the virus does not stop at the door of our schools, so we need the community to help us keep the virus out of schools. And that's one tangible thing that I think that we can do as a community. The third thing we're suggesting is that the district look into a measured rollout of the. We're suggesting that we give teachers and administrators an additional week to work on their safety protocols, the option to ramp up grades and students gradually. Doing this, we have the expectation that our hybrid program will be fully operational by the week of September 21st. This can give us as a district the opportunity to relieve pressure on the system and ensure protocols are working before all students come in at the same time. The fourth thing that we're looking for is that we broaden the definition of what situations qualify for an accommodation for teachers, and that we revisit certain teacher requests for accommodation. Based on the feedback we've received from many teachers, we believe a broader definition is appropriate to accommodate teacher preferences. At the secondary level, we're asking administrators to offer teachers the option of teaching remotely while their students are in school with a paraprofessional, or potentially shifting to a virtual learning class. And at the elementary level, we're asking that teachers be given special assignments if necessary, and we allocate budgetary dollars for additional teachers to come into the classroom if needed. We fully support the administration with their commitment of doing the hybrid model, and especially commitments they've already made, such as moving school a week. Also, the fact that our administration is now giving each kindergarten teacher a dedicated paraprofessional, giving each elementary grade a dedicated paraprofessional. And we would like to see if we have the ability to use paraprofessionals in some other classrooms to creative problem solve for teacher concerns. We believe that these modifications will improve the effectiveness of the plan and respond also to concerns raised by teachers.
So, Erica, could you send me that? That was a lot of material. I was wondering if you could just either present it to the board, some other way, or maybe just send the board and post on the website what you just read.
I can send it, and then we would post it as this document later.
Yeah, I would just send it, and we can post it as on the board website.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Send it an email.
Yep.
Does anybody have questions on those recommendations?
I do. This is Julie. I just think I need a little bit more understanding. And I think this is a question for Nikki as it relates to the number 4 that was out of the different items under broaden accommodation. What percent or how many teachers did we have ask for accommodations that were not given those accommodations or are currently moved to the hybrid model? What does that number look like? I don't know if you're able to share that with me specifically, but I'm just trying to get a feel for what that, because to me, that's the number one piece here with the success of a hybrid model, is making sure that our teachers feel confident in their ability to teach. So I listen to everything else. I mean, this work is all so unbelievably incredible in the layers and we call it the blooming onion, right? That keeps going. But like, to me, the crux is we need to make sure that our teachers are in a position that if they need an accommodation because of a spouse, and I just, if you could walk me through what the process was for layering the tiers on who got the accommodations, how that process worked. I think that might help me understand a little bit more. I do like that the broaden the that is one of these asks, but if you could give a little bit more, so I just have more understanding on how it was prioritized, evaluated, and how the preferences came down. So.
Thank you, Julie, for the question. Just to back up a little bit, we're still in the conversation process with our teachers. And so I can tell you, I'm through 3 out of our schools. So that's where I'm at right now, is I've been through 3. And out of those 3 schools, I have less than 5 teachers that need some additional conversation in order to have them successfully transition back into the classroom. I have more to go, so I'm not discounting that, but I do not have like a firm number district wide. But we did have a broad level conversation with our principals, asking them, this question when it comes to the current accommodation model. Are we going to be able? Are we staffing this? And we're at the point where we can staff this, but if and have those conversations and take those sticky points and try to smooth them over. But we just need some time to do that. And I'm not sure if I want to go really far. I mean, there's 2 different types of accommodations. There's accommodations for the individual, and there's accommodations, I'm going to call it loose accommodations, which aren't necessarily legal accommodations, but still important considerations for us to take to consider in making placements. And so that was like one of the components that you look at is it an employee who needs the accommodation for themselves, or is it an employee who needs a combination for a family member or a more distant family member? And so that's one very simple delineation between looking at accommodations. But like I said, we we work closely with the principals and the informations that the employee provided us to make those initial placements, but they're just that, initial placements. And if we just need a little time to continue to work through the sticky points and the places where we don't have complete alignment yet, but I'm confident that we can get there. Does that help? Julie, what follow-up questions do you have for me?
Well, I guess I'm not then. So it was if legally an individual teacher, if they have a medical, I don't know, accommodation that they're asking for in this, because of the nature of COVID, I don't know how you can separate somebody who lives in their house. I mean, I guess that's where I'm like, how the ladder worked. And I don't know if I'm not being clear, but I feel like I need to have a better understanding on how we went through that, because, and maybe we need to expand that more. And I know it's a matter of conversations and working, but I know we also need to get this plan moving. And I know that hybrid could work and it should work, and we've done work for it, but I got to make sure that our teachers are all in a good spot. And maybe that's too much to ask. I've had COVID myself, so the impact is huge for families.
Lenny, did you want to?
Yeah. So Julie, we know that we have teachers that have requested accommodations based either upon their own or family, for which the initial placement did not match their accommodation request. So we do know that, and we know that from the emails we're receiving. And so when I say we, so Janie, Eric, and I, we want the process to continue. So we want to continue to talk to those teachers, because perhaps if you talk to them and you say, here are the different things that we can do to set up your classroom, if they reach a comfort level that they go, okay, I'm good with it, then we would continue. But if they continue to say, I need an accommodation, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a broader definition by saying, okay, if you need an accommodation, you do not have to go into a hybrid classroom, that we can pull back for that particular teacher, or whether it's 5 teachers, whatever. We don't know the number yet. So we're looking for a process that continues the conversation. Because, for example, some people have requested personal protective equipment. Okay, that's an accommodation we can provide. But where the concern continues and the conversation doesn't work, we're looking for the board to say that we should have a broader definition of who we should accommodate, because we think that their definition might be too narrow. You should know that all these issues have been discussed within the committee with administration. These aren't things that, I mean, we talked to Nikki about it today. We talked to John. We've been talking about what to do with teachers who have a mismatch. And Matt, I thought your question earlier was, if we have 23% of our people that want EVA, are we going to make sure that we have 23% of the teachers that get EVA, or might it be more teachers that get EVA because of accommodation needs?
That was my question.
Yeah. And so not to take, but I think that what we've tried to do is to match the EVA placement of the teachers to the EVA request of the students. That's not lining up perfectly, at least not yet.
Right. Nor would it be, I mean, it'd be a miracle if it did. No, I understand that. Yes.
Right. So the goal of what we are suggesting that the board incorporate is to say, if you can't match up directly, we might have to scale back on the percentage of hybrid classes. And by the way, we want hybrid to go forward. Anybody who's listening, they should be clear. We want hybrid to go forward, but we might have to scale back on the percentage of hybrid. We might have to look at it differently. So for example, you might have students who are in school for 5 hybrid classes, and one of them is the teacher is remoting in. And so in that particular case, we meet the need of the teacher who has a particular need for accommodation. and they will remote in, then we'd have to have a paraprofessional. There is a cost involved in each of these things.
Yes.
We have a very compressed time frame. So if we're trying to figure out costs at the same time, we're figuring out accommodations and interests. And so I think I may have answered more of your question and possibly some of mine.
No, I think that's helpful. It's hard to say, yes, I'm in support of expanding the definition of accommodations when I don't know what the original definition of accommodations was.
Yeah. So Julie, that's a really good point. And just one more follow on quickly is I think it's good to level set. So Erica, you gave that overview, which I think was really helpful context, but just so those watching understand what's happening right now is we as a board, the 7 of us can't move at the speed that the administration needs to right now. So the 7 of us set up a 3-person governance committee, and that consists of Erica, Lenny, and Janie. And therefore, they are having additional conversations on a real-time basis with the administration on behalf of the board. That is not a normal way that we function throughout the average school year. So that's why right now, in real time, you're hearing 4 of us board members here at the same time as others, certain concerns that are coming up in characterizations, which is why Ellen asked if we could see that in writing for digestion. I just want to clarify that so people understand why we're asking each other questions, because it's a little different the way we normally conduct ourselves. But this is helpful.
And can I just want for clarification purposes, only so that anybody who's either just starting to watch, when we talk about having teachers virtually, what is your term, Randy? I can't think. Virtual delivery of instruction. We are not talking about the elementary. We are not, that recommendation is not for the elementary level. It is for specific classes where it would work at a secondary level. I just want to make sure people are very clear that they heard that nuance that Erica had said, because we know that does not work at at a primary level.
And Janie, there might be a small exception to that for some unusual circumstances, but typically that is not the model that we would build at elementary around the accommodation piece.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that nuance was teased out a little.
So from my perspective,
could you explain that again? I'm not sure. What are you saying?
So the recommendation that the governance committee spoke about was at a secondary level, if we reach a point where we cannot come to an agreement on an accommodation for a teacher to go into EVA, and we need their teaching capacity to be in the hybrid model, we want the district to explore the possibility of that teacher delivering content from a remote location while the students are within their hybrid day at the school and being supervised and supported by paraprofessionals within the classroom. And like Randy said, there are going to be some nuances where maybe that is going to need to happen at the primary level, but for this specific purpose, we are talking about not being able to reach those mutual agreements on the accommodations at the secondary level with staff. Does that make sense? I can explain. Is there a part of it you want me to explain more, Ellen, or
well, perhaps. And is this to maintain the secondary licensure, so that if you're in particular subjects? So are we, even with this, are we maintaining our teachers teaching in the licensed areas?
Yes. Yeah.
So we are maintaining that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. I wanted to make sure I was hearing that.
Yeah.
Or that somebody would say that tonight.
Right.
And so can you tell me why you're making a difference, why this is different than for the primary versus secondary?
The difference is because we don't think that it's realistic to have a teacher be remote and then have a class with just a paraprofessional, because so much of what the elementary school teachers do is working within the classroom environment. And so we think that model doesn't work as well for elementary schools. So that's why our suggestion was, if we are in a situation where we have teachers that are uncomfortable and can't make it back to the classroom, that we deploy them elsewhere in the district as like a TOSA or working with literacy, working on interventions, and maintaining the ability to do that virtual for their health and safety, and then hire additional teachers to come into the classroom. Because I think that we're going to get into situations where we need teaching staff and we maybe don't have staff that meets the need. And so that's why we sort of parsed the suggestion into two different areas. One for elementary school where we would replace with another teacher. And then I think we have more creative options at the secondary level where teachers could remote work in and have a para basically monitor the class as opposed to a lot of the hands at the elementary school level.
So, by the way, Ellen, if our teachers and our administrators say that they can work a model where an elementary teacher can go remote, we're not stepping in and saying no. We're trying to work within our limited knowledge. And if there are certain assumptions that are incorrect, we absolutely look for our teachers and administrators to say, if we do this tweak, we can follow what your recommendation is. But what Erica just explained is the gist of the thought process.
Owen, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Erica. To reaffirm what Matt said to the community, four of us have not heard of this proposal yet. And so that's why we're walking through this with such elementary questions. I've got a question about scale first off. Maybe Nikki, this is yours. So I'm working with numbers in my head. We had about 50% of our teachers who were not comfortable with hybrid and wanted EVA, and 50% who are comfortable with hybrid. What percentage here of our EVA preferring teachers are in this condition where we might have them do some sort of virtual instruction into the hybrid environment?
I think that's more of a Randy question when it comes to, because he worked with the principals on the placements, but in elementary in particular, you have both you have an EVA placement and you have a hybrid placement, and those are separate, but in secondary, they're more intertwined. And so, like I said, I defer to our principals on that question, unless I understood the question incorrectly.
So are we talking 50 teachers that this proposal would accommodate? Are we talking 5? Are we talking 100?
I don't think necessarily at this point, and I've been asking to quantify it just like you, Owen, for the last week, because I'm like telling the numbers. And I think that the reality is because we're still part of an iterative process to understand what would make you feel comfortable in a classroom when you requested the virtual environment, and Nikki brought up some things like the Plexiglass and things like that. So I think that's one subset of what we're talking about, is there are teachers that would be comfortable coming back with certain parameters. To quantify the other subset, I think there's going to be teachers that even if we offer Plexiglass and this and whatever, they're just not going to be comfortable coming back to the classroom. And so what we're trying to mitigate is still being able to do our hybrid model and still accommodate teachers that are say, I cannot come back to the classroom because my spouse has cancer or something like that. I'm not comfortable as a leadership saying you have to come back to the classroom. So how can we be creative to come up with some other solutions so you don't have to come back to the classroom? You stay at home and remote in to secondary. But I know you're looking for a quantity, and I don't think we can realistically give a quantity right now.
Okay, so my next question is sort of tied to that. Then, when would all this shake out? In a couple of days? By the beginning of week 3? Have a sense of that, Nikki?
So Owen, I think with the recommendation that is in front of us, what I would recommend is for us to go back and do some work and and continue on with the interactive process that Nikki is leading. Get our 2 letters together and our measured rollout, and maybe by then we would have a little bit more quant results. And because this is all new to me, right now I haven't had Nikki and Randy really comment on that. Does that make sense to you, Nikki and Randy, on doing that?
It does. One thing I just want, because I know the public is listening to this, is just EVA placement does not mean that an employee received an accommodation. And so those 2 things are not equated. It's part of the process, but I want to be very cautious for our community to assume that an EVA teacher placement has anything to do with any type of an accommodation. So I know that's a conversation we're having as a board and administration right now, but those 2 things don't equate. But yes, definitely with the new considerations, I want to work with Randy and our principals and John to make sure that we can continue to staff this model.
Okay. I've got a couple of other questions here. So just so I get a visual on this, so what we're talking here is we're talking about a teacher would be given accommodations and would be teaching remotely into a virtual classroom. And this virtual classroom would always have a para? Is that an understanding here?
Yes, if they go into a hybrid classroom, then that classroom would have a paraprofessional dedicated to them for classroom management.
And would this para be trained in the area of instruction? Let's say it's a high-level calculus class. Would they have that kind of training, or would it be more like a proctor? How do you envision that the para's role in this?
I would say more from a classroom management proctoring perspective. I don't think that we can have the expectations our pairs are going to be subject matter experts and help for things like that. Okay. So that's what the teacher would be there. So
okay, great. I just wanted to get a sense of what the expectation was there. Then another thing, I think you said this, Erica, that we'd be thinking about hiring additional teachers. So I want to explore that for a little bit, because obviously that's got a significant budget impact. Are open enrollment numbers expanding to make this fiscally possible? Where would we get the funds for the additional teachers? Could anybody talk to that for a moment?
So I don't. There is some dollars from the feds. We're still working on. John just got that information this week, so we're working on that. I know there's some dollars that will end. We have to spend them by the 31st of this December, which does not work well with staffing. So we're trying to figure out what that looks like. We do know there is some dollars that we can use throughout the year, but I don't have all those numbers yet, and we're working on that. So in light of what you're asking me to look at, that would be something we can tie into to see if these recommendations make sense.
Yeah, that's where scale starts getting significant, because if we're talking 1 or 2 teachers, it's not that big a deal. But if we're talking 100 teachers, that's a whole different proposition.
Right, and that's why I reiterate. Can I just jump in real quick, Matt? That's why I think it's important to reiterate that this would be something that we would be in favor of once the interactive process of trying to work things out with other accommodations had been exhausted, and that the teacher had a real true need for an accommodation, right? Like it's not just a blanket that this is what's out there. This is a kind of additional step that we can take in this interactive process.
So the teacher hiring would be at the elementary level, not secondary.
Yeah, and what I was going to add on there was, as treasurer, John Tope and I have calls pretty frequently, even in between the finance and facility monthly meetings. And so that one-off usage of federal funds can be applied to some of these needs for PPE or otherwise, Owen, but they can't be used for ongoing staffing, just as a clarification point. And again, same as you, I'm hearing some of these recommendations at the same time. So I think what the governance committee is asking for is, and Julie, good questions too, and Ellen, I know all of us need to see this. I need to see them too, but I think you guys are asking for us to give a broader support that this is where we're headed, goes back to the admin team, then comes back again, and then we start filtering it into budget and seeing what the final teacher numbers and things are. That's where we are, right, Erica?
Yes, because my concern is approving a hybrid model that we don't have creative ways we can actually staff. And so I think that the worst thing we can do as a board is to approve a hybrid model and not understand how we're going to staff it. And so to me, this gives additional leeway to Nikki and John to come up with some creative ways to staff the hybrid model to make sure that we can keep our commitment to the hybrid model. We also suggested the additional week, which might not be necessary, but if we are going to have more complex staffing, we need to make sure that we give the district and the teachers enough time to go through this process, to get people staffed, to train people on safety protocols, and make sure our staff is comfortable and ready to bring students in. And I think that this is something that we can't short, because the last thing we want are teachers that are anxious and nervous about being in the classroom, because that's not going to make a successful hybrid model. Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. I would just say on balance, without applying additional pressure, some feedback I've received one-off from parents is that the distance learning program can kind of be clicking from day one. So my kid starts learning materials, especially at middle and high school concerns, little less for elementary. If hybrid is still doing syllabus evaluation and a lot of socialization, the more that gets extended week by week, I'd like us to know that perhaps that the delivery of the work for people to hear, that will still continue. So we're talking about the co-localization of kids in hybrid with teachers may need a bit more of a softening or trajectory that's a little more sloped over the first 3 weeks if the administration deems it necessary. However, that will not slow the rate of learning going on for either of the two paths in the first 3 weeks. So just, if that's the clarification, then I'm in full support of it. I just wanted to make sure that's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
That's a question I had too, Matt.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Ellen, sorry, you're up.
Yeah, I'd like a commitment from the administration on when they would be able to tell the parents and community of whether this is when we will be able to staff, whether or not hybrid is going to be a go. So I'm just, this seems as if it's still, we don't know, they don't have a time that they can start making plans around.
Aren't we voting tonight?
We're voting tonight, but we haven't been told that they can staff it.
So from my perspective, hybrid should go forward. I view if there's a mismatch, that there's a potential that hybrid might exist for 65% of the students rather than 77% of the students, or 80% of the time for 77% of the students. But my concern really is I'm not prepared to approve a hybrid model that doesn't have a broader accommodation. And it's just a matter of how, and by that I mean accommodation for the teacher requests for EVA. It's just a matter of what series of steps might get us to a product. And I do know that that means that if I have a student who's in hybrid, I might not know if that's 100% hybrid or 80% hybrid. We're still working, from a governor's order from, I think, July 30th. Everything's happening really quick. So we're doing as fast as we can, as quick as we can to get to a model. But as Erica said, we don't want to approve a model that we can't staff.
Right. So I'm just making sure what I'm hearing, and John, I have two questions for you. Are you comfortable with moving forward with this hybrid model? Do you know that we can staff it? I mean, I'm just saying, is it really a go or not?
So I believe it is a go. I think with some of the questions that you're raising, it adds another dimension that you're asking us to look at from a staffing perspective. So we will need time because you asked Ellen, when does the community get this? The community and the parents will get this when you ultimately approve it. So I think Nikki, I think Randy, myself need time with our teaching staff and with our principals to answer those questions that you've put out there with the broadening situation, broadening, I don't know exactly what you did, but broadening situation with teacher preferences. And because there is if we broaden it and we begin to hire more paras to manage classrooms while teachers teach remotely, there's a cost to that, and I believe I'd have to inform you of what that cost is. So I think we should, what I would recommend is keep this iterative, Eric, for the meeting, and thinking maybe we have our next board work session on this on Wednesday, and I'll keep you apprised between now and Wednesday to see where we're at with our staffing, and if we're ready to do that, we could do it on Wednesday and seek approval on Wednesday. If not, we would just extend it out to accommodate the staffing process. Nikki and Randy, does that make sense to you? They've left.
Yep. No, I think that would make sense in terms of a timeline.
Nikki, does that make sense?
I can jump in.
Definitely.
Okay. Sorry, Nikki. If I could just get clarification. So, John, what your proposal is then that we would vote on these proposals that Erica has submitted to us next Wednesday. Is that?
If that's what the board wants, there's a resolution that I'm putting forward tonight that approves the hybrid. You could approve that tonight, and then I bring back the follow-up. With that, it's really the board's call.
It's my recommendation and my thought that we would vote on the model tonight. I think it's important. We have teachers in the school system on Monday. We have a community that is very anxious. I think it's important that we vote on the model tonight. My proposal is that we vote on the model with the two caveats being that we are offering another week if you feel like you need it, and we would like you to broaden our definition of accommodations, which I think will actually get us closer to staffing the hybrid model, not further away.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm comfortable with voting on the hybrid tonight. What I'd feel more comfortable with us on the four proposals to give us a little time and the time and for the community to react on the four proposals. So I think it's reasonable to vote for the hybrid tonight. And so that's a procedural question. I do have a substantive question. And so we're thinking about pushing back the start of the school year a week. Would we extend the school year a week? Would we make up some lost educational time? What's the idea on that?
So it's my understanding from your proposal, Erica, is that you are proposing a week of virtual for that additional week.
if that's what the district feels is appropriate.
Right. There has to be some sort of, we can't just postpone a week with no education being provided. We have to have, because we run out of time.
Yep.
Would it be helpful as a process, Owen, might be helpful for me, Erica, if we just slowly, one more time, walk through those 4 or 5, because on first blush, it didn't feel like that was anything that any of us might have a real conflict with, as long as we understand what it means. Could we just kind of go through those one at a time? Because that might get comfort amongst the group to be able to vote on all of it.
Yes, I just want to do